In our last discussion on the phases of the French Revolution, we talked about the four main phases of the revolution, and at the end, we talked about the revolution ending in 1799 when the Directory is dominated by a military figure who ends up abolishing the Directory, becomes First Consul, and eventually becomes Emperor of France. This individual is Napoleon, and he's worth discussing as part of our understanding of French nationalism because Napoleon, like other symbols, becomes an important nationalistic symbol of the French Revolution and of French nationalism. And in fact, Napoleon as a figure probably is the single most important individual in the history of Western Europe as regards the spread of nationalism. So we want to take some time now and look at Napoleon, and we're going to briefly and summarize his rise and fall, and we're going to do so by using this chart. So let's begin. Well, we recall that with the revolution going on in 1789 and then with it becoming more radical in nature, that many of the nobles flee France and go overseas or outside of the country. And with this, there is a scarcity of officers in the French revolutionary military because most of the officer corps prior to the revolution were of noble class, and with many of them leaving, there is a paucity, a very scarce number of officers. Now Napoleon, who is a gifted leader, because of this and because of his skill as a military leader, quickly rises through the ranks, and at the age of 27, remarkably, he leads the French army in the battle in northern Italy and is actually victorious over the Austrians in 1797. In 1798, he leads an army in the Nile against the Egyptians and the British and defeats them at the Battle of the Nile. But unfortunately, his army is stranded when the French fleet that is deployed outside of Egypt in the Mediterranean is destroyed in a naval battle by the British fleet. But what we do see is his rise between 1789 and 1798 as a remarkable military commander and an important figure of the French Revolution. Napoleon does make it back to France and to Paris in 1799 after being stranded in Egypt. And he's welcomed as a hero of the revolution, and as such, and as being a strong figure, he becomes one of the members of the Directory, the ruling Revolutionary Council, and along with one other member, he overthrows the Directory and establishes a new government body called the Consulate, and he is elected consul and eventually first consul. Napoleon rules this new revolutionary government body as the consul, and he remains first consul until 1804, and then in 1804 he has himself declared first consul for life and basically rules France as an absolute dictator. And this is ironic because the revolution comes full circle. The French Revolution starts out in 1789 with a desire for equality and liberty. The French monarchy is destroyed. The French king, Louis XVI, is executed, and it's because of the revolution and the desire and the ability for equality that Napoleon is actually able to make it through the ranks. But once he gains absolute power, he in fact becomes a dictator, and the revolution is ended. In December of 1804, Napoleon decides to bring the Pope to Paris, and he has himself crowned emperor. So in December 1804, Napoleon becomes Emperor of France. Napoleon as a military leader was quite ingenious and basically ends up conquering most of Western Europe, and eventually in 1812, because of Russia's refusal to follow along with the Continental Plan, a European-wide boycott of Britain, Napoleon decides to punish Russia, and he invades with his Grande Armée, a huge army of 500,000 men. And Napoleon is victorious with constant battles being won in his favor and is able to take Moscow, but unfortunately the Russians use a scorched earth policy in relation to Napoleon and constantly back off, and so he spends the winter there but is forced to leave Moscow and flee Russia and ends up leaving with only 50,000 men. In his weakened state, other European nations decide that they're going to take on Napoleon, and at the Battle of Nations, following his Russian invasion in 1813, they defeat Napoleon and the French army. As a result of his defeat, Napoleon abdicates his throne after France is invaded, and he is imprisoned and exiled on a small island off the west coast of Italy, the island of Elbe. And he remains there between April of 1814 and February of 1815. However, he eventually escapes the island, works his way back to France, and during what is known as a period in French history as the Hundred Days, in February 1814, Napoleon, as I mentioned, escapes. He returns to France, and over the course of 100 days, raises an army of 125,000 men. And he nearly defeats a combined British, Dutch, and Prussian force at the Battle of Waterloo. Unfortunately, Napoleon is defeated at this Battle of Waterloo in Belgium in June of 1815. He is again retaken prisoner, and this time he's exiled to a small island in the South Atlantic Ocean, never to be heard from again. And while he is exiled on this island, where he remains until 1821 at the age of 52, where he dies, it is rumored that Napoleon was slowly being poisoned to death by the British so that he could not return and cause more damage. Ironically, Napoleon, who was a figure of the French Revolution, who, because of the ideals of the French Revolution, is able to come to power and becomes an important symbol of the French Revolution and an important symbol of French nationalism, ends up abolishing the revolution, becomes an absolute monarch, and eventually is defeated and exiled.